Hey, what's going on, people? Welcome again to the C-Suit podcast where we talk about all things sports. We're back again for another NBA basketball talk show. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about LA Lakers. They won the title last season in the Orlando bubble. It's been a kind of like a weird season for the Lakers so far. Obviously added a few players like Dennis Schroeder, Mike Gasol, Montrezl from the LA Clippers, LeBron, again, best player in the league, real power with MVP this season. But over the last few kind of games, they've been up and down. They've lost a few games. AD hasn't really, stepped up as most people expect him to. He's gone down in points. He's gone down in rebounds. Even his free throw percentage, that's actually gone way below his career average. What's actually going on with him? And what can they do actually better to kind of like maybe potentially win the championship again? Obviously, you got the Nets in the East. You still got the LA Clippers, Utah Jazz are, coming good. How can the Lakers get better for the rest of the season? Also, basketball IQ. A lot of people talk about, LeBron James. He's got the best basketball IQ ever. Some players just, have that basketball IQ. Some teams just know how to use the basketball IQ to play, given certain situations, given certain periods in the game. But how important is basketball IQ in games or within the game? How important is basketball IQ? I'm Victor, your host. Enjoy the show.
When you have like serious good IQs in the team, like LeBron and and some other players, they just figure teams out. Like in the first quarter, they just kind of like understand their gameplay, understand what they're doing, and they just step up and they just match that, and that shows how they can just come back in the third and the fourth and win games because they kind of like match up to how the other teams.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you on that. I disagree with you on that. That's just an excuse. If you have all that basketball IQ, you should be coming in strong from the get-go. You already
Anthony. Like look at the point of the season. Like they've had the shortest turnaround, and they are the champions. Like they're bound to have a rough start to the start of the year, especially being so close to the end of last season. Same with Miami. Miami have had a way worse start than people expected. But like the Lakers, Antony Davis and LeBron, like they don't have that extra time off that other teams might have had because they went all the way. So yeah, they start off rough, and the team is still gelling because you have a lot of new talent that you're trying to start in five as well with Gasol, Schroeder, sometimes Montrezl Harrell, sometimes Matthews. It's mix and match. So you're trying to also gel these players together into different styles. We've seen it last year with Lakers as well.
After 20 games, I expect you to have some sort of like balance at least, an average understanding between all these new players, And even though you're coming back third quarter, fourth quarter, you're still gelling. All those games, those third quarters and fourth quarters played in previous games should start showing fruit in the first and second quarters, not just the fourth quarters. That's what I mean. Like,
I definitely understand your point, but you have to understand that each team doesn't play the same game style. Some teams come with different game styles. So your gameplay cannot match your opponent. You know what I mean? The same opponent on the night. So with like the Grizzlies, they came out with a different strategy, a different tactic, and they caught the Lakers off guard, and that's why it's so. That's why it's so
scary. That applies to both teams on the court. Each time you play a new team, you're always going to come up with a strategy. So if your strategy doesn't work, it just means the strategy was flawed initially, and then you change it. Are you telling me that the Lakers strategy every single first quarter is flawed?
No, I'm not saying that it's flawed, but I'm just saying that there's sometimes they start at a good pace, and they get their, they win the first quarter, the second quarter, and they go on like to win the whole game like that. But there's sometimes when they probably did not expect, they didn't expect like the strategy from the team, like what they had or the pace or whatever. And they just got caught off guard. And that's why, they went down like a massive, they went down like a big, huge gap, like at the first quarter. And then when they figured their gameplay out and they understood the opponents a lot better, then they started coming back, like, in the succeeding quarters. And that's how they win the game. So I'm just saying, though, it's a bit scary because it's like, how do you beat them? You think you've won them, you think you've beaten them in the first quarter and they just come back and get you,
I'll give them one thing. It shows they're mentally strong.
I think I'll say this here. I think there's a few factors to consider about like teams when you think about this. So the first thing that will come to my mind is, how do you adapt during a game? You're not always going to start off strong. Maybe your idea is to start off strong. Maybe you are going to start off strong, but the opponent does something to kind of throw you off. Once that happens, how do you adapt? How does the manager, the coach, and how do the players talk among themselves and actually adapt to their opposition's game plan? And I think that's what shows a winning team. The fact that you can be losing 30 points and still come back. Now, of course, the question goes to the opposition as well. Do you ever adapt it to your game plan? So how do you counteract? And maybe they're not good enough, and that's the difference between the Lakers and them, because Lakers have that ability. The other thing I'll say that is about that is that you guys were talking about this earlier. It's about leadership. If you don't have a team with leaders, probably impossible. Even though you've changed the game plan, because everyone's depressed, everyone's upset, everyone thinks, we're gonna get whitewashed here. But if you have good leaders, and like as Clayton said, Anthony Davis and LeBron carry the team, then that kind of uplifts the whole team. So I think that basically that game to me shows Lakers' consistency in that aspect and how good they are.
And I think they also use a tactic of the fourth quarter. They tend to put a lot of pace in the fourth quarter, and that catches a lot of teams out. So they have like a huge depth, so they can get like the players required for that kind of strategy. And
it was a few years ago, Liverpool were known as a team that just the blitz team. As soon as the game starts, they pressure you, they run at you, and you concede goals. They'll score goals against you, but halfway through the game or on the 70th minute mark, they're gone. They're tired as hell, and then you start scoring goals. Before you know you've equalized, before you know it, you won the game 4-3 because they're just too tired to actually play. So that's probably what happened in that game as well.
Yeah, like it happens. It's just the Lakers know how to play into a game very well. Like they're not going to expend all their energy in the first. Like they'd rather be down for 3 quarters and be behind by a few points and then go ahead in the fourth. Like every team, like that. As long as you're heading in the fourth and going into the final few minutes, that's when you have the chance to pull off the win. You can be ahead for the first 3 quarters and get blown out in the fourth because you've expended all your energy. They're quite smart with how they play and how energy efficient they are. But like they just struggled in the first. They have struggled in some areas, but they still do have the best current streak in the NBA. But it feels similar to the way they played last year with different players. They played well from behind in games and played themselves into it quite nicely, spend all their energy in the first. They know how to beat teams and play into it with kind of smart players and kind of adapt. The only thing that this season is different is they don't have the large centers to adapt for big men around the rim. It's only Gasol and Anthony Davis will kind of play as a big, aggressive rim protector in terms of the way maybe Dwight or JaVale McGee might have last year.
I won't be concerned at all. I'm not concerned at the moment about the way their strategy is or how they're managing. Because obviously, like you said, they have the best win streak. They're second in the Western Conference. It's just because I think Lakers only 1 game. Jazz have played 1 game extra, isn't it? That's why I think.
No, Lakers have played a game extra. They've lost.
So I won't be concerned. But I will be concerned if during the playoffs they're still losing first quarters. Then I'm like, well, because now you're a bit less chill. There's not as much pressure as during the playoffs, so you can recover from deficits a bit easier. But during the playoffs, like it's gonna be tasking if you're down 20 points or something. Even though you're the greatest team ever, it's still going to play a big part on your mind,
I'm not talking being down 20 points. It's more so that they're like last season, they played very similar in the way they came back against teams. And they did the same in playoff games as well. I know they might kind of blew Miami Heat out of the water and swept teams, but sweeping teams in a series didn't translate to blowing teams out in every single game.
I know, but would you still expect them to go in with like same game plan?
It's not what they want, but some teams know like the Lakers aren't going to go and expend all their energy in the first. We can put a bit more energy into the first and try stretch a lead that will hopefully benefit us in the later parts of the game.
Right now, their strategy is sound. I mean, it's bearing fruit.
We'll see when the schedule go for say in the next few weeks when some of the bigger teams faced off each other. Like Jazz have kind of had an easy enough schedule and like they've been lucky with injuries, and like the Lakers pulled off a few of those wins in the last 7 games with Anthony Davis missing. LeBron kind of pulling it off it, and the Jazz and other teams do the same.